Alright, hello and welcome. It is the Khyber Pass podcast. And this week we bring you Milo Fine. We had a concert last night. Milo Fine, B flat, E flat, alto, clarinets, Acme, slide whistles, ocarinas is what he brought to the table. Myself on guitar, Sam, Will Denauer on upright bass, Benjamin J. Mansavage, Klein, tuba and electronics. I took some time before the show to get to know Milo a little bit, ask him a few questions, and get to where he's at, what kind of things are on his mind regarding improvisation, performance, racquetball, things like this. I will have a short snippet of the playing, after which we'll move right into the interview. There are, apologize for some sound artifacts that muddy up the waters a bit, but not to be avoided. Brought to you this week, as always, by the Khyber Pass Cafe in St. Paul. My name is Paul Metzger. Thanks for listening, and hope you can enjoy the interview with Milo Fine. Now, for first questions, I like to think about you before you played music. How old are you? What are you doing? You're not a music person in any way.
I think I was always a music person because of my father, music in the house.
So you're saying you think you were always including, like, as an appreciator in somebody who would dig.
Yeah, I
But
would listen.
yeah, but what about where it became something that you would participate in and do? When
Third grade. No, first grade. I'm sorry. That was first grade. So
That's like
I had to
5
have
or
been
6 years
5 or
old.
6 years old when I
Mm-hmm.
played a Christmas carol on marimba
Mm-hmm.
for my class in school. And then in third grade, I started taking a snare drum.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a school band association. I'm not really clear on that. I know what it was. Yeah, it was like a music class, and I remember having drumsticks. We were playing like on lunch tables, being taught things, and so it wasn't really from my father at that point, but it was something that.
So they're kind of talking, but not everyone is rocking a snare, I assume, in this class.
Well, it's not the snare; it's the table.
Oh, it's just the table. Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, it's just the table at that point, and from there,
Mm-hmm.
school band,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing.
And that was just felt like a natural thing for you. Do you remember wanting to do that or not wanting to and being forced to? Like, where were you?
No, my
in it?
dad never pushed me
Mm-hmm.
at all. But it was
Mhm.
there. It was in the air. So it was something that was readily picked up on.
Okay. So then, you're just a kid. You're 5, and that's because I've heard that story before about the marimba.
Well, you had
And
that
it's
clip
interesting.
of the that was found when
Mhm.
Mark bought the collection, and you found that clip and you passed it on to
Yeah.
me of me practicing
Yeah.
to do that thing in first grade. I think one thing I learned or felt coming up, doing things like that, and in junior high, playing a snare drum solo with the band, that kind of pressure or tension, I didn't have an appetite for. I didn't understand that at that point, but I didn't. It was years and years later when I played racquetball with Terry Ingram, a drum student of mine who I ended up doing some music with for a number of years, and Scott Newell, musician, I worked with quite a lot, and we go way back. They were both avid racquetball players. So when I'd go into the racquetball court with them, for me this was exercise. It was just, yeah, this is good exercise. I didn't have the killer instinct. They would, if I started getting up on them in points, then they bring out the artillery, and they'd be doing these not professional shots, but pretty fancy things where the ball be ricocheting off the corners and that kind of thing, and that just it didn't interest me. So from there, it's a whole thought process about.
So are you putting a similarity there, like between the racquetball and maybe performance, where if you're doing a solo, you don't have like the instinct to really bring it, and this is your time to shine, and
Well,
what's
wanted
the connection between
I wanted
those
to
two?
do as best as I could.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to play it correctly.
Mm-hmm.
But it was that whole thing about competition and having this this marked goal.
Mm-hmm.
You play this written music, and you got to play it in this particular way in order to quote unquote do it justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't that apparent in junior high school. I mean, it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't part of the agenda, really.
You're saying for you,
Yeah,
and the
for
way you
me,
looked at
and
it.
even in the school, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not as cutthroat as, say, some sports are when
Right.
you're dealing with junior high and high
Mm-hmm.
school. Uh, but there is still that attitude where you have to do you have to play a piece of music up to a certain level, and it's sort of a false it's a false god. And I was starting to see through that, and in a way that led me into improvisation, where you create things in the moment, and that discipline is still extremely apparent and you're still dealing with it, but it's something that's really coming from inside you. Don't get me wrong, I appreciate people who can execute any kind of classical music or jazz, and they have the technical expertise in the traditional sense of the term to do that. If it's just technique, not so much, but if there's soul behind it, if there's commitment behind it, if you
Mm-hmm.
have that feeling, then that links up what I'm getting to. I'm just talking about my wiring, or how I was interfacing with the world. That kind of working on something to get, it's an artifice, the idea of perfection, for me. And again, I'm not knocking people who have an appetite for that and who do it with soul and depth and resonance. But for me, it was finding, locating another way to realize what was in me, and for me that was not based on written music, which was and it was ironic in a way, because for many years I taught drums, but basically basic and intermediate drumming. And again, I never had in a related way, I never had an appetite for learning all the new hot licks when they came out. And really, if kids coming up, that's what they want, you know. And I was more about certain basic things and technique things, in terms of my teaching. But yeah, there was a disconnect for me, that evolved over time.
So it became some. It sounds like you were within a music structure that wasn't resonating with you.
I didn't like the anxiety and stress that was related to it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this that kind of striving. I
Is
was.
the so there's less when there's improvisation involved?
It's yes, yeah. In terms of stress,
Mm-hmm.
for me,
Do you? I mean, you realize most cats would players are the complete opposite of that.
yeah,
Well, I mean, that play an instrument. I mean, they can sight read through all kinds of mental stuff. But if you go, well,
yeah.
they can't. They can't really do it. Maybe, or it makes them stressed out.
Yes.
But you get stressed out to not do that.
Yeah, and in part, you know, as I've thought about it, it could come, it could have been reinforced by the fact that my dad, who was a jazz drummer and a gigging musician and a teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and was in the Minnesota Orchestra. Um, I do remember as a kid him coming home and being in a mood, and my mother would say something about, you know, he's just in a bad mood, or what I came to realize is he was working on some score that, let's say it was a more modern 20th century piece that had some stuff in it, that he had to get down, and he was readily able to do it, but there was a lot of that going on. I What became clear to me is that there are many more ways to approach sound and music than those ways that are accepted and are the norm. So it had to do also, I was fueled by just a certain rebellion, a certain questioning about how things work and why they work that way and why can't they work this way, which leads me into in a previous podcast when you talked to Mike Lewis, and he was at one point talking about working to get this gorgeous tone, this beautiful tone. I understand that, but we're surrounded with that value. We're inundated with that value. Now, anybody from certain schools of avant-garde classical music to free jazz and you follow years later with punk and stuff and noise, so-called, there's a rebellion against that. In other words, against that beauty, or finding beauty in other sounds. And I'm not just talking about moving against, I'm talking about recognizing that yes, there is beauty in that tone, but there's beauty in a lot of sounds.
Mm.
And thinking about that, and the reading I was doing at the time and listening and playing, it just made sense. So I was trying to rewire myself a bit so I could perceive so-called ugly sounds as beautiful sounds. Now that sounds very trite in a certain sense, but it was really valuable for me, particularly at the time, because it wasn't just a phase I was going through. It was something I really wanted to internalize. Irony there is, it just played in Austria at the end of August, and one of the Paul Fields, who's a classically trained violinist who works with Fritz Novotny in the Reform Art Unit and the various groups, we did a trio thing in the small town of Gmunden, and he turned to me after the set. I was playing clarinet and drums. There was no piano. And he said, "You have a beautiful tone on the clarinet," which was really interesting, particularly at this point in my life. Scott Newell at one point said to me, "Why don't you, play that resonant," he didn't use the word resonant, but that beautiful tone, or use that more. And I said, because that's what everybody strives for. So I think the comment from Fields caused me to think about how I've more integrated that into my sound on the horns now. I don't belabor it, but it's come out as it should. So for me, the palette, limited by my vocabulary, as we all are, is pretty broad. But it was in part made that way because of the conscious choices I made when I was young, and saying, no, it doesn't just have to be this way. There are other possibilities. So, and also along with that, that's when I was cultivating the intuitive, but combining it with the intellect. And I go on about this because in improvisation in particular, I think a lot of people, when they think they're playing intuitively, they're just doing defaults. It's stuff that they know, or that they rely on, and what they're not doing is they're not thinking about what they're doing. And I don't mean conscious thought that interferes with the moment. I'm talking about that flux between the intuitive and the intellect. So you're making these spot decisions. I'm sorry, I'm going on a bit here. This is kind of fascinating to me. I brought my horn in to repair. A gentleman named Doug Keene, who's just a brilliant repairman. He's having trouble with the B flat, and he was having a bit of a difficult time ascertaining, what the problem was. Then I did some playing, and he's always dug my playing. I mean, he's a superlative reed player, a technician. Yeah. But he could hear what I was doing, which a lot of cats who are trained that way don't, but he could hear it. So he watched me. He watched this thing I was doing, and he said, "You know what you're doing?" And he said, "I don't want to explain this to you. I don't want to, but." I'm probably partly paraphrasing here. He said, "I can see your embouchure working, and you're making decisions as to what to accept and what to reject right on the moment, right in the micro moment." And that blew me away, because he was right, and I'd never thought about it that way. So you can't depend on intuition. If you overthink it, then you're not improvising. So it's just this flux, and sometimes one more and one a little bit less. But all the decisions, for me anyway, are made on a micro moment level.
And this is something he spotted in your playing.
Yeah, just
As a
like
guy that's not part of his discipline, you're saying?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. But for the number of years I've been taking the horns in to have
Mm-hmm.
him work on them, he's always dug the playing, and it never seemed patronizing. It never seemed he's just saying that to be a nice guy. He's just I dig what you do, you know. And for him watching me up close and seeing that, and I'd never, and this was relatively recently. This was within the last year that this happened. Um, so yeah, when I play, I live. I mean, I'm living through sound, so that takes away that artifice of stress and anxiety and everything. It's something. It's been a life work, so I don't assume it's going to be there. But I'm always so grateful that it's there when you know I pick up the drumsticks or hands on the piano or mallets on the marimba or horn to mouth. Where I go in my head, it's just instantaneous because that's why I don't like the word perform or show, because for me, I'm not performing. You know, I'm I'm playing. I'm there, and performing to me, it's you're performing, entertaining. That's the for me personally, not for someone else, and that's why I prefer the words gig and concert to show because it's not a show. You know, it's I just I submerge so it resonates with me. Unlike those experience, I never wanted to go to a state contest in junior high and high school where you play a solo in front of a judge. And
Did
I
you ever?
I I did actually with with a vocal group. I played drums with a vocal group. Somehow that became a category, or that was a category, and then that was in high school. But other than that,
That was a
no.
competition you went to though with that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. But it's that whole idea of being judged by a set of standards, which I think are not the be all end all. You know, it's sort of well, as when I've been confronted with, well, you can't play the changes, you don't know all the standards, and my response is, I don't want to. My standards are my own, so I am maintaining my own standards, um, and I think when you have a set of standards like that, which people are supposed to adhere to and worship, well, then you're talking religion, politics, corporate mindset, all of that. It's a hierarchical thing. It's a way to dismiss things that are a threat or things that question. And your hippest cats, I think, are open to these other possibilities as long as you're there, you're really doing it. You know, they don't see it as a problem. It's like, oh, that's really interesting. This is nice stuff. This isn't what I do, but wow. Well, it's like Doug, you know, for him to hear what I was doing on the horns. So yeah, those kind of things where you're graded and rated, and this is your value according to who made up these standards. That's what you look out. It's decades ago, but you look out at the stars or whatever, and we're talking about these kind of rules and regulations here on this thing that's less than a speck of dust, and it's like, please come on, it's all about this shuffling for power and control. I'm better than you because I can do this thing that you can't do. No, I'm doing something different. So, um, what's wrong with that?
Let me kind of ask something you hinted at a little earlier of uh, improvisation having its own pitfalls of you may develop vocabulary or some moves that become very comfortable for you. It's something you know you can do that'll take you like out of the ordinary path pretty easily without. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And that can become as much of a, kind of a personal dogma as, the written side, the academic side of music. Like, this is how you produce a beautiful sound, or, you're adhering to a value structure there. But I think one of the pitfalls of improvisation is to fall into your own set of uh, moves. I don't know how to say it good, but do you
No,
know what I'm, do you know what I'm
yeah,
leaning on?
absolutely. That's exactly what I was getting at. That
So how does one such as yourself, uh, who has, I think because you've spent such a long time within improvisation, how do you feel yourself through that? Because do you know what I mean? There
yeah,
are
yeah.
points of discovery, and then you might want to revisit, or don't you? Do you know what I mean? So if you could
And
talk on that a little bit.
absolutely, that's it's all about uncomfortability. Always having an element of uncomfortability in your work and paying attention and knowing when you're. I often talk about it as short circuiting. That's a little pet phrase where something's feeling really good. You're in this groove. It doesn't have to be a groove, but it's. And what I'll do is shut it down. Or let's say I state an idea and I leave it. Sometimes I just stop playing because stating the idea is enough. So I'm keeping all these possible, not all, but as many as, a lot of possibilities are there in every moment. So for me, it's questioning, it's challenging myself, it's feeling a certain element of uncomfortability. Let me make this clear. I'm not talking about free improvisation as being the only good way to make music or the only valid way to make music. Otherwise, then I'm an academician. Then I'm doing the same thing that those cats are doing. What I'm saying, what it boils down to, particularly at this point, I came up in this music, as I've said many times, pretty close to the epicenter when it was really starting, when people were doing things because it needed to be done, not because it was a way to get grants or get, or come across being cool or get over with a certain critic or whatnot. There was this sense of this work has got to be done. At this point, improvisation is just another genre. It's just so. Again, another cliche I use. It's creativity is in the hands of the individual practitioner, regardless of genre. Now, I partially exclude pop music because the whole agenda behind pop, it's popular, it's hooks, and I get all that. And with age, I can appreciate more of the craftsmanship of of that kind of work. But when you're talking about risk taking creativity, yeah, it's the individual practitioner. It's not the genre. So we could be talking jazz cats. We can talk, and I love listening to 20th century so-called classical music, electronic music, as well as free jazz or improvised music, and always been interested in the palette less explored
Hmm.
and not being so it to get back to your question. Sorry, I digress. um, yeah, you have to be mindful of what you're doing, and you have to find different ways of interacting with people, you and with yourself. So for instance, you play quietly underneath, or you just add a couple little almost subliminal sounds that maybe nobody else in the group pays attention to, but it sends out a little ripple. It's a little signal. In a way, I'm thinking composerly, but I'm not dictating what everybody else has to do in that way. I'm doing something that keeps things fresh and alive for me. And in that way, when working with people, as particularly with a group of people I work with now in different combinations, including yourself,
Don't drag me into it. Oh my God.
it is what it is.
Mm.
Um, it's been just extremely gratifying because people are focused, and that's not always something you find. And consistently, everybody seems to give a damn that I work with, and that's just so key, and it fills me. It fills me up.
Mm.
But it is that questioning, that challenging, that like, I'm falling into this. I'm doing this thing. Okay, well then I'll stop it, or I'll go another direction, or like I said, I won't play, or do something to keep myself on my toes. Other times, however, I'll go with the groove. Why? Because I've been avoiding it. So then that becomes the unusual thing. What Paul Fields said about my horn, like, you have a beautiful tone. I was doing some squeaky stuff, I was doing the high register, which I do, but I was hitting these notes, and he heard that. And so, again, things become full circle. The known becomes the unknown, becomes the known. No, sorry, the familiar becomes the unfamiliar, becomes the familiar, becomes the unfamiliar, but it isn't as metric as all that. It's really jagged.
Mm. I think maybe we end it there, Milo, and pick it up maybe if you would be willing on a second interview.
Sure.
So that we have time for you to get ready to play, and there's just a lot to think about for me of what you've covered so far, but thanks for being willing to be on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for the opportunity. This was, you opened up some things. I'm sorry I took up so much airtime, but...
No, that's the idea, though.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
I want that part.
All right.
All right. Well, there you have it. Another installment of the Khyber Pass podcast, available at www.khyberpasscafe.com. Look under music. We also have there listed the other performances upcoming that you can get to our Facebook page. That will list those. I'd like to thank Milo Fine this week for sitting down with us, and hopefully I can revisit with Milo at a later date. He is someone that has reflected on an awful lot of the elements that go into improvisation, music, performance, the concept of a show. These are things that are interesting to me, and hopefully to you as well, as a listener to this podcast. Next week, hopefully, I can bring 2 interviews, because we have 2 shows next week. But they are not completely arranged yet for interview. The first would be Dave King from Happy Apple, and the second being either Cole or Lynn Avery. But we'll see what happens with that. Thanks again to Milo Fine. I'm your host, Paul Metzger, thanking you for checking out the music interviews with improvisers that have played the Khyber Pass Cafe